everybody, to Victory Circle Podcast. I'm your host, Jason Wilson. Today, we have a guest who I've known basically all my life. This brother, I can tell you that he's a brilliant, enterprising, fierce competitor who refuses to be denied. Welcome, Wesley Owens, to the show.
Thanks, man. How you doing?
I'm doing great, man. It's an honor to have you.
Hey, man. Thanks for the invite. I appreciate it.
All right. So, man, on this show, I love to follow everybody's career path. We're going to go all the way back to childhood, man. What was your childhood dream? What did you want to be when you grew up?
I'll tell you an interesting story. Of course, we know each other. We've known each other since elementary school.
Yeah.
And, all of our friends' parents were, as they say, doctors and lawyers and Indian chiefs. And, back when we were kids, man, I thought I was going to be a doctor. I really wanted to be a doctor. Right. And I remember I was in my grandmother's kitchen one day, and my stepdad asked me, he said, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And with all the conviction in my heart, I looked at him and I said, "A millionaire." And I think that was the first time that I remember divorcing myself from the outcome, if you will, and focusing on just the success.
Yes.
So yeah, when I was a kid, I thought I wanted to be a doctor, but eventually I realized that really what I wanted to be successful, and however that came.
That makes sense.
It tells it makes sense with the rest of the story, which I'm sure we'll get into in a second.
That's right. Okay, so take us all the way up to college. What happened when you got to university? What was your focus?
So, as you know, I went to Howard. I'd like to take this opportunity to say the capstone of Black education. Thank you very much.
Yes.
So I went to Howard, and again, I was there focused on being a doctor. Right. I chose Howard because they had. I felt like they had an undergraduate program that was outstanding. And from there, if I wanted to go to medical school, literally all I had to do was go down the hill. So I didn't have to leave any place.
Right.
So I felt very comfortable there. And, I probably up until my sophomore or junior year, I was like, oh, yeah, absolutely. I want to be a doctor. This is what I want to do. Started to recognize two things. I started to recognize, one, that I couldn't really make out those little shapes in the microscope that everybody else is making out. Right. I felt like maybe if I couldn't figure out what was in that microscope, then maybe being a doctor just wasn't for me.
Right.
But coincidentally enough, I took business courses, and I did really, really, really well. Like I had an A in all my business courses. And so, that was balancing out the C's I was getting downhill. And so between the two, I was like, well, hey, listen, I'm making it, right? I got to be average. But, it just, as I matriculated, I started to realize that, maybe being a doctor wasn't exactly the right call. It wasn't for me. It wasn't for me. So, I dated a young lady in college who at the time was an engineering major. And I remember when she graduated, she got this job offer making like $65,000. And back then, computers were, they weren't what they are now. Back then, if you had a computer on your desk, it was basically tapped into a mainframe somewhere. And it was, it was a big hunk of, it was all in one sort of thing. Or if you had an IBM, it was two pieces. I mean, it was huge, right? So, computers weren't what they were then, but they weren't then what they are now. But back then, I was thinking to myself, hey, wait, somebody's going to pay you $65,000 a year? I might need to figure this out. So I started to tap more into technology and business and how the two interacted. And as they say, the rest was history.
Man, I'm proud to say that I was at your first business presentation.
I don't know. One where it's friends and family only? Are we going to talk about that? Okay.
No.
Let's talk about it.
No, before that.
Listen, that one, that's funny. So we'll go back to my very first company. My very first company was Incline Consulting.
That's it.
That's it. That's it. And it was, it was IT consulting. I'd worked a couple of corporate jobs and discovered consulting and discovered what that was about. And decided that after a little bit of corporate training, I had enough to move forward on my own. Had no idea what it meant to incorporate a company. I remember I called my mom. I said, Mom, this is what I want to do. She said, okay, well, she didn't know much more than I did about it. And she said, I'm going to send you over here to a friend of the family. So I went over and spoke to an attorney who was kind of the friend of the family. Mm-hmm. And he started trying to walk me through what it meant to incorporate. I was lost. I don't get this at all.
Yeah.
And we got me incorporated anyway. And, I knew how to do what I knew how to do, right? Which was the IT piece of it. Didn't really understand the incorporation piece of it. Mm-hmm. Certainly it had a little bit of exposure to it at Howard, but not enough to really know, right? I knew enough to be dangerous.
Right.
And he started to walk me through it, and I started understanding at a very early age all the challenges that business owners face, right? From banking to, legal to accounting to, get a good CPA, just all of it. And fortunately, I had that experience at a very young age. Hmm. Yep, absolutely. That's funny. Yeah. My mom talks about that all the time. She talks about how, I had this business presentation. I was going to get these investors. I was going to do it all. Right.
Right.
And I remember that we rented this hotel room, and all these people were going to show up, and all these people say, oh yeah, I'm definitely coming. I want to hear this presentation.
Yeah.
It rained that night, and it was friends and family. That's all it was. Friends and family.
That's all you needed.
That's all you needed. I think the room held, I'm going to say 60 or 70 people.
Yeah.
And I think there were 12, right? And, I knew every last one of them, right? And, and that was it. But it was good training ground, because I worked really hard on this presentation, stayed up, really late the night before. And, everybody was friends and family. And, but the way things work, I stuck to it. I figured it out, and almost a year to the day later, I had another presentation for the company that I was representing at the time. I was what's called a VAR, value added reseller, for this particular company based in California. Mm-hmm. And as it turned out, I'm gonna say the room again held 70 or 80 people, and it was standing room only. And wow. My mom was the very last person to get there. And when she walked in the room, she almost fell over backwards. She was like, I can't believe all these people are here, and they're all waiting on you. And I was like, yeah, they are. And, great night. Needless to say, at the conclusion of that presentation, it took our business to the next level. But it was certainly it was a turnaround in 12 months. It really was.
Wow. I don't believe in coincidences, man. Everything happens for a reason.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So,
absolutely.
So from there, from the whole IT experience, what was next in your career?
So, did really well with IT. Ended up selling that company for, what I thought was a king's ransom. Turns out it wasn't. But I didn't know any better, right? I was still young. Went into the real estate space, and which, as you know, was the family business. Mm-hmm. And worked there for probably 10 years, 15 years, right up until the crash of 2007, 2008.
Right.
And then when the market crashed, I was a walking CNN documentary, basically. I was the guy they were talking about on CNN, where they were like, and if you're holding real estate and you're highly leveraged, I didn't know what highly leveraged meant, but I knew that I had mortgage payments to make, right?
Yeah.
And I had this real estate portfolio that was tremendous, right? And I tell people, listen, you really have to understand real estate backwards and forwards. You really have to understand leverage. And, it's about more than just owning the property. You have to understand how to buy right, sell right, and understand the finance behind all of it. And, I got a lesson in all of that in motion, so to speak, right? There's this theory they use, or this concept they use in business school, where they say you got to build a plane in the sky. I was literally building the plane in the sky. And when the mortgage crisis hit, it was like my plane crashed, and it crashed. But I made it out with. I was relatively unscathed, right? I had I think at the time I was holding about 21 houses, something like that, and was able to either sell or refinance all but one. So that to me was pretty good.
That's phenomenal.
That's pretty good. But it just, again, you have to understand real estate. You have to understand finance, because that's a huge part of it.
Right.
And like I said, I was able to get out of all but one. And the one that I didn't, I was able to allow somebody else to kind of take it over for me. And funnily enough, as we sit here in 2022, they still own that house.
Oh, that's great, man. So you've pretty much mastered the art of transition. Let's talk about the pandemic. How did that affect your business, and how did you transition during that period?
Well, during the pandemic, it was a welcome change for me. It gave me an opportunity to kind of hit reset, right? And for me, business-wise, I was trying to figure out what my new course was going to be. We covered the real estate stuff. We didn't cover the staffing stuff, but I started a staffing business in 2012. So I had a few years after real estate crashed that I was trying to figure out what I was going to do. Stumbled upon the staffing space, and I started to really, really, really understand it. I did what I suggest people do all the time. And sometimes, it's easier to make suggestions than it is to take your own advice.
Right.
And I had to take my own advice. I went and got a job, at a staffing firm, a small one, and learned the staffing business. Actually, let me go back one. I got a job at a very small staffing firm, so small they didn't pay me. True story. Probably the best 2 months ever, because for 2 months I was like, wait a minute, where are the checks? Oh, it's coming, and it never came.
Wow.
But for that 2 months, I had access to the platforms that I needed, and I got some really good experience in learning to recruit, right? Which in the staffing space that's the foundation of staffing. You've got to know how to recruit.
Yes.
You've got to know how to read a job rec. They're just things you have to know how to do. So once I did that, I left there, got a job at another small staffing agency that actually would pay me, and only stayed there a few months. But in that few months, learned staffing on a small scale, but what they call full desk recruiting, which means you do everything, right? You get the job rec, you find the people, you onboard them. I mean, you do it all, right? Talk to the hiring manager, negotiate the salaries, you do it all. So I did it all. And then from there, after that, I went to corporate staffing at Randstad and learned staffing on what I consider the big stage, where you see different departments doing different types of, doing different pieces of the staffing process. And so did my piece, and stayed there for a few months, and then of course launched my company and grew it. And grew it literally right up until almost the pandemic started. So once the pandemic started, it gave me, we had to pivot, but it gave me just a really, really, really good break. The staffing agency was 22 cities, So I did a lot of traveling,
Yeah.
had a lot of employees, had to think a lot, had to think about just processes and procedures. There's a lot of managing people, management teams, just all of it. So yeah, when the pandemic came, listen, give me a second to sit down. That's what I did. I sat down for a second, until I could figure out what I was going to do, what the next move was.
During that time, man, did you go through any kind of mental health issue? I mean, that's a big issue right now.
It is a big issue, and I'll tell you, I think everybody, whether whether you're an entrepreneur or not, went through some mental health during that time, right?
Right.
Things that were simply inconceivable happened, right? The entire world shut down, right? Like everybody.
Yeah.
No cars on the highway, no businesses were open unless they were essential, right? So that you're talking about hospitals and jails. Because everybody else was closed. I mean, you couldn't even go, um, you're talking about a situation where malls are closed, where movie theaters are closed, right? You're talking about restaurants are closed, takeout only. Um, the only people who were making money right there were Uber drivers.
Right.
But it's an inconceivable thing. And so depending on, where you were mentally before it started, it only got worse. And, I imagine people started dealing with their own humanity and their own, just all of it, because people were dying from something we absolutely could not see. And at the time when it started, nobody had a real explanation and nobody had a real cure, right?
Right.
There still is, as we speak now, there still is not a cure. There's some vaccinations you can get, right? That in the event that you catch it, it will help you heal. But there was not a cure. So you're talking about 1 million people, give or take, died from something that at the time when Trump was president, he said it was just a little bit worse than the flu.
Right.
I guess we all now know that's not true, right? But you're talking about 1 million people died from a virus, and suddenly, right? I have a friend whose family operates a mortuary in New York, and he talks about how they literally before the pandemic they just upgraded their coolers at the mortuary. And he was like, thank God. He said, because we wouldn't have been able to handle it. And I'm sure you saw the pictures online of bodies being kept in refrigerated trailers, right? Like if you just watch that on television, that affects everybody's mental health.
Absolutely.
Because again, it's the inconceivable, right? It's people are dying so fast, we can't bury them with dignity. And that's inconceivable to most people, right?
Right.
Certainly there's the crowd that's like, oh, cremation's okay. But for other people for whom burying bodies is a religious ceremony, that's just the inconceivable, right?
Yes.
And listen, I'll be honest with you. I got to a point where you had to isolate, right? It's lonely. And that's just the truth. And you just get to a point where you're just like, look, you can't watch enough television, have enough telephone conversations, play enough, online chess or whatever your game is to occupy yourself for what essentially turned out to be a year.
Yes.
Right? That's a long time. They said, well, go outside and get some fresh air. Okay, go outside and get some fresh air, but you got to stay 6 feet away from everybody because you don't know who's got it. You got to, you had people walking around in hazmat suits, right?
Exactly.
Not just a face mask, not just gloves. You have people in hazmat suits, and and medically speaking, I'm what they consider at risk, right? I'm diabetic, so that means that if I'm at risk, if I'm a part of the at risk population, I definitely don't want to be outside. because, as a diabetic, what they tell you is, if you get this, it's going to be really tough on you and you might not recover. Yeah, I'm not ready for that.
Right.
So, like everyone else, like it beats on your psyche. And, then you start talking about, you're trying to figure out what your next business is going to be. It's extremely lonely. So, if anything, mentally, I would say, you start to feel a little bit of isolation. You start to feel a little bit of depression because you are by yourself, right? You hear the expression that 4 walls are closing in. I can't imagine there would ever be a time that would be more true than during the pandemic.
Yes. And how did you deal with it?
I did exactly what you weren't supposed to do. I went to the grocery store every day. I'm a rule breaker. What can I tell you? I mean, you just walk around, man. You gotta try and clear your head. You gotta try and take walks, take breaks, whatever. So, I'm outside. Luckily, I live in Midtown. So, I can walk to wherever, jog to wherever. I can be outside, get fresh air, and not necessarily have to come in contact with people.
Right.
And that's what you do. I mean, like I said, I don't think I've ever watched as many movies and TV shows and listened to as much radio and played as much chess. I mean, it's isolating, right?
Yes.
Like, in our building, there were a few confirmed cases. So therefore, the HOA made a decision that they didn't want visitors in and out, right? Because they were trying to control the environment as much as they could. So even from there, like, now you can't have visitors. So you're really isolated, right? That's all you can do. Hey, go outside, take a walk, listen to the radio, play some chess, watch some movies, and figure out when this is going to be over.
Right.
And that's kind of what we did.
So now, Wesley, as a venture capitalist, tell us about that. How does it work? How does one get into that?
Well, wow. So, like I said, I was at home thinking, right? And, and it's funny, it's kind of the running joke. Everybody's like, well, what you don't want to let him do is think. He'll come up with some really crazy ideas. It's a crazy idea. It's a crazy idea. I decided that I wanted to explore the world of venture capital. And I decided that I wanted to, and I knew nothing about it. Nothing, right? It just seemed like it was pretty cool. I started watching, Afrotech and a couple of the other blogs. And, you see some movies and, Nas has a fund. Jay-Z's doing some stuff. Magic Johnson has this fund that he's got, and he's doing some stuff. And, it started sounding really cool to me. And
Right.
so I looked around and found a program, got into an executive MBA program at Columbia that's focused on private equity and venture capital, and just kind of started the journey. And it's, along the way, you meet people. And I'll tell you a few things that I've discovered along the way. There are approximately 7,000 VC firms
Is
in
that
the
right?
country. 7,000. Out of 7,000, approximately 30 of them are Black owned.
30. And that's all.
30. That's it. So, the racial disparity in the space is tremendous, to say the least. And out of those 30 that are Black owned, where Black people actually write the check, they, as we say in the industry, they have the pen where they actually write the check. You don't see a lot of investment being made, right? The average VC firm is anywhere from $15 to $50 million. And on average, most VC firms are backing anywhere from 10 to 30 companies, right? Anywhere from pre-seed to Series A, right? So let me slow down. Pre-seed being typically pre-revenue. And then there's seed, which typically means we've gotten it off the ground. We're making a little money. Now we need you to seed us, help us grow.
Right.
And then obviously Series A means, hey, look, we could prove this idea works. We have, a $10 million, $20 million valuation. And now we're looking for additional capital, right? That will now help us really blossom into what we're supposed to be. And of course, you've got, Series A, Series B, Series C, and then sometimes you have a Series D, or sometimes people go from Series C. They may end up going public, or they may be acquired, right? Whatever the exit strategy is.
Yes.
But, I was like, this is actually, I felt like it was the right step for me. I felt like it was a good step for me. And, I'm having fun in the space. I started working with a couple of different funds to start scouting deals. I started judging pitch competitions, and I've worked with a couple of different companies that have been raising their seed round, and just incredible ideas. And I've seen some incredible ideas. Getting a little bit more into the NFT space, because that's the horizon.
Yes.
So we're working with a company now that has an NFT platform that I'm trying to help them raise capital. So yeah, it's been a good transition for them.
Oh, that's great. That's great to hear, man. What do you think about the metaverse?
I think it's coming. Honestly, I'll tell you. You look at Mark Zuckerberg, and you look at his, the team and everything they've done. When they changed the name of the company from Facebook to Meta, that was very telling, right? Once you understand mergers, acquisitions, and all that stuff, you start to understand that he was setting himself up, or he was setting the company up to start to acquire a lot more things, right?
Yes.
So, obviously Facebook, or Meta as they're called now, they own Facebook. They also own Instagram. They own WhatsApp, right? So there are a number of digital assets or digital properties under their brand. The metaverse being, one of those. And obviously, you've got WW3 that's coming. They have a lot. There's a lot of runway for them. And I think the metaverse, it's crazy. There are people who are in the metaverse making money as we speak.
Yeah.
And the metaverse is still in its infancy. So I think as it continues to grow, I think you'll see a lot more non-traditional entrepreneurs in the metaverse making money. And I think you'll see a lot of opportunities for people who are interested in philanthropy to endow their various causes in different ways. Just through the use of NFT, the use of blockchain technology and cryptocurrencies. Those three words and those three technologies are going to allow people just to really, really, really even the playing field when it comes to wealth and wealth creation.
Absolutely. Yeah, I believe that too.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Man, to segue into everything that's going on with the mass shootings in the United States, man, what do you think is the solution? I mean, should they change the gun laws? What should they do?
I'll be honest with you. I don't think there is a solution. I think there are a number of stops you can put in place, right? I think changing the gun laws is one thing you can do. Absolutely. State of New York recently raised the age requirement to purchase a assault rifle from 18 to 21. That's a huge step, right?
Yeah.
If you remember the young man who did the shooting in Buffalo at the grocery store, he was 18, right?
Right.
Young man who did the shooting in Texas, he was 18, right? So first of all, raising the age restriction or the age requirement from 18 to 21 is a good step, right? If you know anything about assault rifles, they're extremely expensive.
Yes.
And the more, if you are a gun enthusiast, what you also know is people who own assault rifles never, it's almost sacrilegious to say it's a stock assault rifle, which means you got to add the grips, the sights, all the stuff, right? So that just makes it more expensive. My question becomes, where does an 18-year-old get, $3,500, $5,000 to start spending on assault rifles?
That's a good question.
The young man in Texas had 2. So, that's a question for me. But I think you have to start there, right? Everybody, there's a lot of discussion around mental health and, not selling guns to people who have mental health issues. I think if they're documented mental health issues, absolutely. Maybe we shouldn't sell you an assault rifle. Maybe we shouldn't sell you a handgun, period.
Right.
But I think there's also, that's a slippery slope, because what you're going to find that there are people who are able to mask mental health issues, right? And so they'll slip through the cracks. And so, you don't want to be so restrictive that nobody can buy an assault rifle, right? But at the same time, you want to be protective of society. So I think there's a balance between restriction and protection. I think that's where legally we need to be. I understand the NRA. I understand that they are a huge lobbying organization. And I understand, they have deep pockets.
Right.
But at a certain point, your humanity and your empathy for others has to win out over dollars and cents. And that's where I'm hoping, your members of Congress land. That's where I hope your governors land. That's where I don't know if it's a federal fix. I don't know if it's a state by state fix. I don't know if the answer is both, but I think we need to start having that conversation, because ultimately, if you're not gonna ban the assault rifles, you at least need to restrict how people have access to them.
Wesley, man, thank you again so much for being on the show.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Man, do you have any last words of wisdom that you would give an up and coming entrepreneur? What advice would you give them if they want to go into business for themselves?
Oh man, that's not even a hard question. I think at this point, I just have so many answers to it. So this is what I'll say. And this first sentence is going to be super unpopular. It is, but I'm going to justify it on my next statement. So the first thing I would say is, up and coming entrepreneurs, go to college. Super unpopular.
Right. Gary Vaynerchuk wouldn't say that.
Right. But here's why. A lot of being a business owner, making money, people can come up with ways of making money, right? You can start cutting grass at 15, start a landscape company at 17 or 18, cut 50 yards at $50 a pop and do well, right? So it's not about you don't know how to make money. So I'm not suggesting that, right? There are 15-year-olds who are flipping NFTs right now, making more money than most people. They make more money off of a transaction than most people make in a year. So I'm not suggesting it's because you don't know how to make money. What I am suggesting is making money is not all that business is about, right? There are other things. There's the accounting aspect, the finance aspect. There are all these other things that are included or involved in being a business owner. Now, the other part is, I always say to people, hold off on becoming an entrepreneur at least until you're 30.
Until you're 30.
Again, that's about to be unpopular. I get it, right? I've seen some 25 and 26 and 27-year-olds in Atlanta who are doing tremendous, right? Whether it's a lash studio or, obviously Atlanta is the home of cosmetology, at least so I think, right? We're the home of Bronner Brothers for sure. And Bronner Brothers has, as I understand it, the largest hair show in the country. And so it stands to reason that Atlanta has a number of cosmetologists, right? There are salon suite studios all over the city. Again, you can be a cosmetologist at 18, right? And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that. What I am saying is at 30, you begin to build your network so that as you begin to make the transition to business, and maybe I'm thinking of more of a traditional business, but as you begin to make that transition to business, the transition isn't as hard because you have a network, right? So, the last thing I would say, man, I would say when you become an entrepreneur, you have to be really good at using your resources, right? You learn to use your resources. So, again, once you're, if you wait until you're 30 before you venture into entrepreneurship, you've built a network. After that, you start to learn how to use those resources, and you start to really understand, marketplaces, right? Certainly in today's society, we've got a lot of different platforms, but there are platforms, marketplaces. They kind of all go hand in hand. They all go together. But at the end of the day, you start to understand that. You understand commerce, and you really start to understand how to line things up from start to finish. And I guess really this is my final point. The most important thing is to get a mentor. There's no sense in reinventing the wheel. And if you can connect with someone who has been there and done that, then it saves you time, energy, effort, and money. But it also fast tracks whatever your effort is, right? None of us become entrepreneurs and go into business for ourselves so we can practice doing what it is we say we know how to do. We all do it for money. We do it for financial and monetary gain. The fastest route to that is mentorship, whether it's with, it's people who've done it before, or, and it may not necessarily be mentorship in your field, right? Sometimes you join peer groups, and there are people who are there to help you problem solve along the way. So it may not necessarily be specific to your field, but it's just specific to just to business in general, entrepreneurship in general, right? Solving problems in general. But those are really the things I would say. If I had to do it all over again, I definitely would say, hey, look, first and foremost, find a mentor. That person's going to help you avoid some pitfalls and really, really fast track your journey to success.
Man, thank you so much, Wesley. It's been great talking to you, man. God bless you.
Man. Hey, God bless you too, man. The pleasure's been mine. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, brother. Take care.
You too.
All right. Thank you for watching Victory Circle Podcast. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel.